This episode of the MiamiTech Pod is brought to you by AWS. Are you a cloud-native startup? Startup Day Miami was built for you. Join us at the Intercontinental Hotel Miami for a one-day, multi-track conference filled with opportunities for AWS startup customers to connect, learn, and grow. Attend sessions that cover modern databases and data architecture. Learn about cloud security fundamentals. Explore the state of venture funding in the cloud. And attend our CXO Roundtable on scaling for growth. Whether you're a CTO, a builder, or business leader, this can't-miss event is filled with knowledge and Florida business connections you won't find anywhere else. Startup Day Miami from AWS. Knowledge and inspiration to prove what's possible. Register today by visiting refreshmiami.com/events, then search for AWS.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode, we believe it's 82 of the MiamiTech Pod. I'm joined with my co-host Maria Derchi today, and we've got a special guest, Chester Ng from Atomic. Chester, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you jump in and give people like a little 30-second background of who you are and why you think Maria and I are the best podcast hosts ever.
Best ever. Well, first of all, thank you both for having me on Lucky episode number 82, and really for everything you do for the community here. I'm sure we're going to talk about my move to Miami and all of that, but one thing that's really been striking is just how welcoming you OGs have been to all of us weird newcomers coming to town, really with open arms. And so really, really appreciate the warm welcome and for inviting me on this pod today. Happy to do a quick intro of myself. So, I was born and raised in LA.
Wait, I didn't think 30 seconds was going to do it justice, so feel free to take much longer.
I'll go for
seconds.
Yeah, I was sort of just joking. Yeah. So the floor is yours, Chester.
Yeah, 82 seconds for pod 82. Here we go. No, I was born and raised in LA, some son of immigrants, classic immigrant story, youngest of three boys. Grew up in LA for 17 years of my life. Then I moved to San Diego for school, fell in love with San Diego, and just found excuse after excuse to stay there for about, I think, like 15 years. I lived in San Diego before moving up to San Francisco for about a decade. And then about a year and a half ago, made the sudden crazy decision to come out here and get a Florida driver's license, which, all of my Cali friends still don't believe that I have. They think it's really weird. And sometimes I don't really believe it, still getting used to it. But I'm sure we'll dive into that today. I'm a partner at Atomic. We are a venture studio, and I'm sure we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I've been here for a year and a half, live in Miami Beach, work in Wynwood, where our offices are, and really, just a serial entrepreneur over the past kind of 25-ish years and three downturns, who has gone from building companies serially to building companies in parallel over the past kind of 7.5 years at Atomic. Happy to dive into whatever you guys want to dive into.
Well, love to hear I want to dive deep into Atomic, but before that, your career path that led you to there. You mentioned serial entrepreneur. To kind of take us through some of the companies you've launched and how that went.
Yeah, so I got started in the late 90s, actually, during the first dot-com boom, and subsequently the first dot-com crash. I credit and somewhat blame, but mostly credit my older brothers. Mentioned I'm the youngest of three boys, but I credit both of them for really, helping to get me on this path inadvertently, somewhat. One of my older brothers, he's been at Apple for I think 25 plus years now. He was, early on the special projects team, which was famously these small teams that Steve Jobs would put together to work on special projects, many of which hit really in a really big way, like the iPod, the iPhone, and then now the watch, which he's working on. So I learned a lot just watching him from afar about product design, product marketing, and really how to innovate with very small teams, which is one theme that we're big believers in at Atomic. But it was my oldest brother who had the startup bug. He started a company in the late 90s, took it public. It was $1 billion public company. I was a little bro in college at the time watching him do this. And so I had to leverage a little bit of nepotism and get an internship at a startup summer of 1999. And that's really when my startup journey began and never ended. I was spending more time kind of working at startups, venture-backed startups, some that had just really kind of incredible IPOs and really incredible outcomes, and then really incredible crashes as well thereafter. And I was spending more time working at these startups than I was going to class, candidly, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I just fell in love with it. I just loved, the 0 to 1 process. I loved the 1 to N process. I loved everything about building a startup from the ground up and really scaling it. And so when the market crashed in 2001, that was right when I was graduating school. Conventional wisdom, as well as my Asian parents and all of my friends, would say, go get a real job, go into consulting, go into banking, go join a big company. I was really stubborn. I just wanted to hold on tight and keep going down this startup journey. And so I held on tight at one of the companies I was interning at. It was one of the first business hires at this company. They were pre-revenue. We were laying off everybody, and I just wanted to keep going, and ended up kind of spending the next 7 years taking that company kind of from the ashes of the dot-com crash to a $1 billion IPO, and it was a really formative experience for me. And then in 2008, I started a company right in the heart of the global financial crisis. So I kind of pick crazy times to work on startups. So this was my second downturn. Happened to start a company right before the market went upside down. Raised my Series A on Lehman Brothers Monday. I remember clicking refresh on the SVB account, hoping the money would show up, not knowing if it would, but it came in. And yeah, built that company to another 7-year journey. Built that company to a very profitable growth stage company backed by top VCs. And it was really during that experience that I familiarized myself a lot with venture. And I found that some of my favorite investors, advisors, board members were founders or operators that had turned VC, which has become a big trend over the last decade. And really, they were incredibly helpful because they had been in my shoes as a founder. They had experienced the high highs, the low lows. And, about 7.5, 8 years ago, I, began to think about trying my hand at it and kind of really going to the other side of the table, as they say. And I had known Jack Abraham, who's the founder of Atomic, and my partner, for a while now. We had known each other as founder friends, comparing war stories. We had both started companies in 2008 during the GFC, and he was just getting Atomic off the ground. I admired what he was trying to build, this unique model, which I'm sure we'll dive into. And I jumped in. We were kind of, 3 companies in at the time. We had a small team of 5 people, had our first starter fund, and really thought there would be an opportunity to partner up with Jack and scale this. And also saw it personally and selfishly as an opportunity to have my cake and eat it too. The model is pretty unique, so I'll dive into that as well. But yeah, it's been a journey going from serial entrepreneur to parallel entrepreneur over the last couple decades.
So what were any of the companies that Atomic had incubated before you joined, are any of those still around, or were those, I don't know. So tell us about those.
Yeah, the original companies, all of them are still around, believe it or not, all 3 of them. One of them we ended up merging into a company called Dialpad, which is a unicorn, enterprise software unicorn. We merged our company with them and really, kind of brought AI to voice, which is very much, of course, on trend today. But yeah, all three companies are still around today, believe it or not. And the really neat thing is when Jack said, "Hey, come into Atomic, into our office, and check out some of our companies." I was like, "Jack, I'm not looking. I'm just taking a break right now. I'm not looking for anything yet." He's like, "It's okay. Just come in and help out a couple of our companies. Nothing official, nothing formal." And I showed up for a couple of days a week, just advising some of these startups. And one day he gives me a badge. He's like, I'm like, "Why are you giving me a badge? I don't work at Atomic." And he's like, "Well, it just helps you, get easier access to the building. And so you don't have to get a guest badge every day." I was like, "Okay, fine." Next thing I know, I get an email. I have an email, chester@atomic.vc, which is my email today. It's like, "Jack, why are you giving me an email? I don't work here." He's like, "No, just, it's easier for communications and it's cleaner from a confidentiality standpoint." And next thing I know, I had a employment agreement. I was like, "Jack, what's going on?" So anyways, that was kind of the story of how I ended up joining, somewhat inadvertently, but it's been an incredible partnership and run since.
Well, that reminds me of when Brian and I were working on a project together before I joined Refresh, and kind of he mentioned he needed to bring someone on board to kind of run the organization. And I thought about it, and I texted him like on a Friday when I was like, "Hey, I'm interested." And he was like, "Okay, come to WeWork on Monday." I come on Monday. He's like, "This is your email address. This is," and I'm like, "Oh, that was the full conversation." So then I just, yeah. So I definitely resonate with that. But if you've listened to the podcast, we had Jack on the kind of early days when we launched the podcast. And if you follow me on Twitter, you know that I'm a huge fan of Atomic and the whole team there. It's like you guys just hire the best people. And so I love you guys so much. But for those who aren't familiar, take us through Atomic, what they do, what the model is, and some of the companies that you guys are building.
Yeah, so Atomic is a venture studio. So what that means is we have a fund, a $270 million fund that is exclusively for investing in the companies we start and build from the ground up. We're about a decade in now. We've built dozens of companies in a range of different industries, from healthcare like Hims and Hers, a company we took public 3 years after launch. It's a public company today. Found, which is a leading weight care company. Real estate tech companies like Homebound in the home building space, Bungalow in the rental and co-living space, enterprise AI companies like Replicant and Butter, commerce companies like Open Store, which is a local company we built here with Keith Roboy and Founders Fund crew. But it's a very unique approach. It's different than traditional venture capital, where every company in our portfolio, we're not only the first investors in the company, but we're also the founders of the company. We build the company from the ground up. We either start with an idea or we start with a founder. Those are the two different ways we start companies. We have an idea that we have conviction around, or we have a unique insight around. We have an internal team now of 70 people, 70. And the team is consisting of designers, engineers, recruiters, marketers, sales, business development, finance, accounting, HR, everything you need to build a company from the ground up. And so when we get a conviction around an idea, we can deploy our resources to go research it, test it, validate it, or invalidate it, and really turn the idea into a product, into a business, and ultimately into a company, and then bring on the co-founding team to take it the distance. So that's kind of one way we start a company. The other way is we just bet on the founder, and we're somewhat agnostic to an idea. We bring them on as a founder in residence over the span of, call it 3 to 6 months. We go look at a subset of ideas together that we're mutually intrigued by and excited by. Maybe call it 10, and we try to get from 10 to 8 to 5 to 2 to 1 through this process of research and testing and validating and invalidating these ideas. So it's a pretty different approach to venture capital, but also venture creation. But it's been a ton of fun over the last 7.5 years for me, but really a decade for the firm.
What are some of the traits or characteristics that have sort of repeatedly popped out to you as key attributes for someone to be a successful founder? Because I'll tell you from my experience mentoring and advising hundreds of startups, mostly super young, super green entrepreneurs. I've seen patterns emerge. So I can tell in a few minutes whether or not this person's going to be successful. I can't tell whether or not that idea they're working on is going to be successful, but I feel like there will be something in that person's next 5 years that's a hit, right? But I'm curious if there's sort of something that to look for, or that you found is this is a good indicator.
Yeah, I'll separate what we look for in 2 buckets. What shows up in the box score and what doesn't show up in the box score, to use a sports analogy, or maybe to use a more specific professional analogy. What shows up on the LinkedIn and what doesn't show up on the LinkedIn. As you can imagine, we spend a lot of time and energy thinking about talent. Oftentimes internally, we just say, hey, we're in the talent business. Folks ask me, how do you spend your time? Half my time is spent really recruiting, looking for the right people to work on the right problems and ideas, and looking for incredible founders, incredible founding team members, incredible engineers and operators and builders and executives. So we think a lot about this question, and we're constantly evolving our talent programs, our processes, our pipelines, our systems around talent. So I'd say in terms of, the things that we look for that show up in the box score, these are probably the more obvious things, which is, we kind of look for some sign of entrepreneurial drive. Um, that doesn't mean that they've been a founder before, but it does mean, um, more often than not, that they've had an entrepreneurial experience in their life or career, whether that's, maybe it's a side hustle in college that they worked on or high school, or, that doesn't always show up in the LinkedIn, of course. So, or, they were part of a startup, they weren't a founder, they were maybe an early employee, even if a junior employee, and they went through the high highs and low lows of that startup and really, learned a lot from that experience being around a high growth startup. Or they've, tried to start a company and they failed before. That's okay. We're looking for the drive. We're looking for that, that founder passion and that entrepreneurial passion. But it really depends. I mean, sometimes we look for more domain specific experience. Sometimes we look for stage specific experience. Sometimes, we're unafraid to bet on first time founders as well. So, there's a range of different things we look for that show up in the box score. I think more interestingly is what doesn't show up in the box score. It's that, grit, that resilience, that scrappiness, that hunger, that chip on their shoulder. They've got something to prove. Love the chip on the shoulder. Even some of our most established, experienced founders and CEOs, they've had so many wins on their belts, and they've, built billion-dollar companies. But in one case, one of our founders built a billion-dollar company, but has a chip on their shoulder. They really want to build a $10 billion company, right? So it applies at all levels. That's the type of thing that it's harder to source on LinkedIn, but we really try to get in there and get to know somebody and really what drives them. And we're looking for a lot of those different characteristics that kind of make up a founder and entrepreneur.
I mean, do you ever run across people who you think like this would be a great founder, but I don't think they're like thinking on the scale that we want them to think on, because like I know dozens of so-called like indie hackers and stuff like that who are making comfortable businesses for themselves and their families, but they're not like, swinging for the fences, so to speak, to keep with the sports analogies, but they're like they're they're getting on base a lot, and they're scoring a decent amount, but they're not like home run slugging, right? And I feel like that's contradictory to what the VC model needs, right? You need people who are shooting for 100 million, 500 million, $1 billion businesses, right?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think fundamentally, one of the things that gets us going is really this opportunity we see to make entrepreneurship more of a career choice and career path for everyone, whether they do it with us or not, whether they work with a studio or do it on their own or go through an accelerator, or just not completely avoid venture capital. We feel like if you think about really the smartest and brightest people that are choosing their career paths, they're very clearly defined paths. There's the banking route, there's the consulting route, there's Google, Facebook, the big company route. Entrepreneurship is kind of this black box. It's like really hard to figure out. Of course, increasingly there's a lot of content out there about it, but you kind of have to know somebody still. It's still hard. So we always think about how do we just open that up in terms of we tested something, I think maybe a year and a half ago, where we allowed founders to apply without an idea, which is kind of a unique model, where we just wanted to get to know folks, and try to identify those kind of needles in the haystack, diamonds in the rough, founders that maybe have not yet realized their full potential, but combined with the right ideas, the right resources, and the right capital partners, we can unleash them on a really big problem in a big market. But certainly, I don't feel like this is the only way we should do things, or this is the only place to do things. I think there are plenty of really talented entrepreneurs that can build really successful companies, and that can be defined as not by just size, but just by impact without venture capital. That's okay. That's all good. I just think fundamentally, the more entrepreneurs that are working on problems, the better we'll be just overall, whether it's with us or not.
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think one of the things that draws me to entrepreneurship in general is the idea that you can use business mechanics to solve real world problems, right? And to drive value to society using business. Um, but yeah, no, and I'm really fascinated by what you guys are doing, and we can get into a little bit later in the conversation some of the things you're most excited about, like what spaces you're excited about, because um, like I've been following what you guys are doing for a while, and I think you guys were pioneers in certain spaces. Telemedicine. You guys were the leaders in that space and still are. And like that's just to me just scratching the surface of that space. Like there's still such a huge, vast amount of opportunity there. But I want to also talk about some of the other things that you guys are excited about, um, and also like. But before that, before we forget, I think Maria wanted to talk to you guys or ask you about the Builder Summit.
Yeah, this is gonna be the second year in a row you guys host this, right? During Miami Tech Week. So yeah, can you take us through what you guys do for that week and who is that the right fit for?
Yeah, time flies. It's kind of hard to believe it's already been a year since our first um, annual summit. I guess we can call it annual now that we're doing it again. So the Builder Summit is our 1 day, we call it unconference for builders, founders, engineers, operators to come together to share ideas, learn from each other, learn from extraordinary builders who have scaled, very impactful, successful, high growth companies. It's something we tried for the first time last year as an experiment. Honestly, it was during Miami Tech Week, Miami Tech Month, and we thought, okay, there's going to be a lot of folks that are intrigued by Miami that might want to come visit Miami. Maybe some of them will want to move to Miami, but it'll be a good excuse to try to pull together a group of builders. Last year we called it, I think, the Future Founder Summit. We rebranded it for 2.0 to kind of broaden the scope of it. The experiment was a hit. It was oversubscribed by, I think, 2x, much to the chagrin of our events team. We had nearly 1,000 applicants and our venue. We were only able to fit a small percentage of that. Unfortunately, I think we had maybe like 75 folks that we were able to cram into our small venue. But numbers aside, most importantly, um, we started a number of new companies with builders that attended last year. I think we started 4 new companies, 5 actually, including one that we might start soon. So these are 4 companies that did not exist before this moment, where we brought folks together to share ideas, learn from each other, and it was very engaging, intriguing event, and really great group. And I think 2.0 will be even better. And I think it all ties back to that goal I mentioned earlier. Is like, one, how do we make entrepreneurship more of a conscious career path, more accessible to folks? And then 2, related to that is how do we build more companies, build more companies here in Miami? So we felt like this summit is a no-brainer way to try to chip away at both goals. So the date is April 26th, Wednesday, April 26th. We have some amazing friends, some special guests joining us, which I guess I'm going to share today on this pod for the first time, which is a number of folks, including Alex Rodriguez, A-Rod, who has not only built a Hall of Fame career as one of the best baseball careers ever, but also an impressive post-game kind of portfolio of companies. David Sachs is going to join us. He's built a number of iconic companies, of course. Also one of the best venture firms today, and one of the best, one of the top podcasts in the world today. Only rivaling with the Miami Tech Pod, of course. Sarah Jones Simmer, who as COO of Bumble, built that and scaled that from the earliest stages all the way to an $8 billion IPO, which is an incredible builder. Kristen Schaefer, who was really early at Postmates and built really the first of this latest generation of food delivery apps, and really the pioneer of that category, all the way to acquisition by Uber for $5 billion as the CFO of the company. Emil Michael, who helped build Uber as Travis's kind of right hand on the business side. So a really great lineup of builders You'll see the consistent theme here is builders. Certainly some of them invest, but really we wanted to bring together builders and a great group. And yeah, you can find out more on the website, builderssummit2023.com. But the main theme is the best time to build a company is now. We can get into a lot of reasons why, but we want to bring together a really great crew here in Miami to build together and explore ideas to build together.
So is the capacity going to be bigger than last year's venue, or is it going to stay?
I think it's going to stay at the same.
Affair?
It's going to stay intimate. We just felt like that was part of the magic of last year. We tried to design it as an unconference. There are plenty of other, much bigger and better, like grander conferences here in Miami. We're not going to try to compete with that. We want to bring together a small group and have light programming, but really enable folks to break out and really explore building together. Know that there's some other really amazing events going on that week and month that are much bigger and probably even better speakers and content there. I think Tom Brady's headlining one of them, the Emerge event, which is pretty amazing to see. I had the great opportunity last year of speaking at Emerge. I opened for Pitbull. Basically, I had to speak right before Pitbull, so at least I get to say I should put that on my LinkedIn. I opened for Pitbull, Mr. 305 himself. So that's a really great event. I think there's the Tech Week event that the Founders Fund crew also puts on, which I'm sure this year will be amazing as well. So it's a really exciting time to be in Miami. So definitely encourage anybody who's not in Miami already and not living here to visit that week for one event or the other.
Well, perfect segue into our favorite topic, which is Miami. Would love to hear how the experience has been for you. One of Brian's favorite questions, what you surprised you about it, and especially in your situation, I feel like we were mentioning this right before we started. Is a lot of people who we picture moving to Miami, maybe you think are very young in their career or just founders, but a lot of questions we get is when people are moving their full family here, and what is life like for that, as opposed to just being alone or a couple. I think that's a whole different dynamic. And so you moved your whole family here. So would love to hear about the decision to move to Miami and what life has been since you moved.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's really crazy that we live here. I still ask myself every day, like, how did this happen? We moved here a year and a half ago, August of 2021. I characterize the decision as, let's go on a family adventure while the kids are young, sponsored by a strong business case with how much Atomic as a firm is betting on Miami. And so I kind of tackled the decision and how we're feeling about it on both fronts so far. To your point, Maria, this was, it's a big decision to move an entire family. I mean, it's a big decision to move in general, but to, get 3 other people who have equal votes to equal board votes to align and support this type of move is really big. Thankfully, it was unanimous across the board, and thankfully everybody unanimously loves it. It's been really amazing. But from a family perspective, in some ways, it kind of, I don't know if it sounds weird to say, but I think Miami is actually underrated for families. When I was making the decision to move, I had plenty of comps in terms of kidless friends and peers or single friends and peers that had already made the move. They were loving it. But very few families that I knew that had made the move. When we made the decision in early 2021, we didn't land until August of 2021. And we didn't really know any families here, actually. So I kind of didn't know what to expect, to be honest. I knew what to expect from, again, the single kidless friends who were telling me about their lives out here. But as you can imagine, it's kind of different. It's kind of different. There's some different factors to consider. So I'd say a couple things from a family perspective. One thing that's really exceeded our expectations has been just how easy it's been to make new friends and build community here for all of us. For me, my wife, my 2 daughters. Last year, my daughter's class, she's now in kindergarten, was made up of 50% transplants. 50%. So 1 out of 2 kids were transplants from, all over the world. That was a cool thing. I mean, certainly there were some Californians, there were, New Yorkers, there were a few folks, maybe somebody from Chicago, but some folks from Latin America, Europe, Asia. And this just kind of creates this like different vibe, this openness and kind of eagerness to connect. And it really helps accelerate and strengthen that process of making new friends and building community. It's, a bit like freshman year of school. I know, folks use that analogy, but we really felt it where everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's like really open to meeting each other. And that's really unique. That's really unique. I don't think that if we packed up our bags and moved anywhere else, we would have that same type of dynamic. I think like also quality of life for families is great here. I mean, all the obvious stuff that all of your listeners know about already, the weather, the water, the travel opportunities nearby. It's really neat. And then, I think the other thing is the opportunity to expose the kids to all of these different cultures. Definitely, Miami is clearly one of the most diverse cities in the world. I think it is factually actually the most diverse city in the US, major city, where it's the only one that's greater than 50% foreign born. So, to thrust the kids at such a young age into this melting pot of cultures, viewpoints, backgrounds is really formative and a really unique opportunity for families here. So yeah, it's definitely exceeded our expectations from a family standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the family dynamic and aspect is super important for folks to hear, especially folks who are, thinking about Miami, and also those folks who are new to Miami. Like Maria and I are both natives. We've seen a lot of people come and go over the years, and the historical pattern that I've seen of all my friends that have left town or burnt out on Miami has been the folks who didn't make friends, right? Or who didn't embrace the weirdness of Miami, right? The folks who were annoyed that people spoke different languages than them, and so it's sort of like, but I feel this latest wave of folks, and yourself included, that came to Miami understood that this was the dynamic they were coming to, right? Not like I'm coming to Topeka South, like this is a completely different beast than, going to, Kansas City or Chicago or wherever, right? Like it's its own thing. And I think it's amazing that so many of the folks who are new to town have embraced that and leaned into that and realized like this is going to provide a unique dynamic for my experience. I'm not going to change everybody around me, so I should like embrace how everybody's unique. And I think Miami also has this interesting sort of underlying tone of laissez-faire. Like no one like expects you to change your culture to fit Miami. Like it's sort of, we're all adding our own ingredients into this melting pot, so to speak. We're not expecting everybody to conform to whatever recipe was here already, because to be honest, there wasn't anything here already 30 years ago, 40 years ago, or whatever it was. Like it's such a new town.
No, and we love that aspect. I mean, a fun example is it was recently Lunar New Year, which is the most important holiday for a number of Asian cultures, including Chinese, Vietnamese, Thai, um, Koreans as well. So our school basically we partnered up with our school to essentially bring Lunar New Year to the school. It was really cool. My family, we're Asian American descent. We were born here, but it was a really cool opportunity where, my wife, my two daughters, and myself, we were invited to basically give a presentation and bring in a performance to really teach the student base of many hundreds of kids about this tradition and this culture and this holiday. And it was a really cool opportunity for my daughters, who are 8 and 6, to be on stage in front of hundreds of students and talk about culture, and chip into the melting pot, to your point, and throw in a piece of our culture so we can help others learn, but also use it as a springboard to learn about other people's cultures. So it's pretty cool.
That's amazing. I love that. I love that.
So that we don't come off as completely biased. If you could wave a magic wand tomorrow and change one thing about Miami, what would it be?
I mean, if you can dig deep down and find one singular possible thing that's not
Is it the
amazing.
turn signals? Is it, yeah, the lack of
Look,
turn
driving
signals?
here is crazy. I mean, like, it's kind of like a video game, but you know, I don't really want to play a video game when I'm driving here. The traffic's crazy. Some of the drivers are crazy, and certainly, look, I think with any city that has experienced experiencing this level of growth, there are going to be infrastructure challenges. Just like a startup or a company that's going through hyper growth, it's going to feel like some wheels are falling off the bus while you're driving. But yeah, I mean, certainly there are some infrastructure challenges here. I think the encouraging thing is, the local government is really, really active and seems to, really care, and kind of seems like a simple thing to say, but that's been something that's really struck us coming here, is how open and engaged and active the local government is in terms of listening to concerns and talking to you and addressing concerns and trying to put plans into place and actually trying to take action. Now, it's not going to be perfect like any city, especially going through this type of growth. But I'm cautiously optimistic that some of these infrastructure challenges will be addressed over time.
It's funny you mentioned driving as your one wish list thing to change. I remember talking to a bunch of folks from the now defunct Argo, the self-driving company, as like, why did you choose Miami? And they were like, well, Miami driving is a shit show. If we can teach a computer to drive here, we can teach it to drive anywhere. So might as well start with the hardest possible environment and then adapt from there. And I was like, yeah, that
Hopefully
makes
that's not
sense.
the reason they went defunct because they chose Miami.
Yeah.
Well, I think they didn't realize how hard it was to teach a computer to drive in Miami, offensive nature. So
Yeah.
But I did one of their sit-ins where like they took me around in one of the cars and it worked really well. I don't think Miami was the reason that they went defunct. Um, but no, I remember them saying that too. It's like all the other self-driving cars companies chose like very safe
Mhm.
bets and they're like, why not choose like not even just Miami, but like South Beach, that they
Wow.
chose this like very like south of Fifth, this very small radius that's like
That's
just
definitely
crazy.
advanced. That's
It
hard
just
mode in video games.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
exactly.
that's tough. I don't even drive around there. Like, I don't. Yeah, I haven't even bought a car yet. I've been here a year and a half. That shows you how I feel about driving.
Well, see, that's another good point of like, yeah, people think sometimes Miami is you can only get around with cars, but
Yeah.
it's with Ubers
Yeah.
and everything, it's gotten so much easier to
Yep.
not own one. But one question I'm dying to ask you, you mentioned that you started companies during two downturns or
Hmm.
were with companies during two
Hmm.
downturns. With another downturn potentially underway, what would your advice to founders be?
Yeah. Um, it is the best time to start a company. I mean, in a decade plus. I mean, folks much smarter than I, like Bill Gurley at Benchmark, have really said the same. And I think Bill's quote was, it's, best time to start in 15, 20 years now. And I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the most impactful and iconic companies were started during downturns. You had, 08, 09, Airbnb, Uber, Slack, Square, Instagram, 2000, 2001. Those were the formative years for companies like PayPal and Google and Amazon, Salesforce. And there are a few reasons why it's a really great time to start a company. First and foremost, talent. The talent market has completely been displaced. I mean, I'm not just talking about the hundreds of thousands of free agents of tech workers that have been laid off, but also which some amazing talent is displaced and now is looking for their next chapter. But also, really, there's this trend towards early stage during these downturns where that cushy kind of big company job or that pre-IPO stock at a high flying kind of decacorn is less of a no-brainer than it was maybe in the last few years, where startups actually have a chance. Startups can compete head to head. They don't have to worry about Google and Facebook or Stripe and Instacart coming in and overpaying an engineer by 3x what a startup can afford. Like the playing field has been completely leveled for talent, and we're seeing this firsthand. Just the influx of amazing builders, which is why we're doing this Builder Summit, that are interested in building, that are interested in going 0 to 1, going early stage. So I think it's such a great time for early stage builders to come together. I think in this environment also, besides kind of the talent displacement, the competitive kind of playing field also gets leveled. There are less competitors, less well-funded competitors. It's just easier to compete and stand out. So that affects startups when you look at their marketing, their go-to-market, their ability to win business. It was so overheated and crowded over the last decade, really, especially in the last 5 years, where sometimes we would see this dynamic where we would start a company and we wouldn't even announce it, but somebody would find out about it. Next thing we know, there's 2 to 3 copycat companies that pop up that are vying for the same attention, vying for the same customers, vying for the same employees, vying for the same capital. So I think that's been leveled as well. So it's less competitive, easier to market, and ultimately there is a lot of capital that has been raised, hundreds of billions of dollars, on the sidelines of venture capital that will gravitate towards high quality startups built by some of the best founders working on some of the most important problems. So we're pretty bullish about building in this market downturn.
So following on that, like about building new companies and stuff, what's an idea for a business that you wish existed that you guys are not gonna attempt to build, or you either for whatever reason? I'm just curious because we all have these like crazy idea lists of different things of business ideas. Like Maria knows I'll randomly text her in the middle of the workday, like someone should start this business, blah blah, type of ideas. So I'm curious, what's one or two of your I wish this existed, but I don't want to build it ideas.
So a fun example of a startup that we did attempt to build, but are no longer working on. But I still feel like somebody could take a run at it. So we were talking about self-driving cars earlier, and there's been incredible technology that's been built, and it's really evolving quickly, and it's really a hard problem to solve, right? And especially if you're in South Beach, and you're trying to, dodge people running across the street and drivers driving the wrong way, and the Miami U-turn thing that always happens, where some car to the right of you is U-turning in front of you while you're trying to turn left. And all of this technology has been built for these really hard use cases on the road. So we thought about, could you take that technology and actually apply it to the ocean, the sea, where it's a lot, easier. It's, you don't have, there's not that many things that can go wrong. You can predict for them, you can model for them, and it's not crowded. And so could you use that technology and basically build autonomous boats, specifically autonomous fishing vessels? Because fishing is one of the most dangerous careers. A lot of fishermen, fisherwomen, women lose their lives out there on the boats. It's really scary and really dangerous, but it's really one of the most important industries, and it's not going to go anywhere. And so we thought, could you build autonomous fishing vessels? And we actually started prototyping this. We had a couple engineers that were working on this in our San Francisco office, and we actually, they had a prototype that they put into the local pond. And this is the pond on our campus, and it's a really beautiful pond, and there are all these ducks there, like really like iconic, like beautiful part of San Francisco. But then they were going to they wanted to start doing target practice on the ducks, and that's when we had to step in and like kill the project and basically halt this idea, and shutter the company. But I still think it's a really fascinating idea. We now have a motto internally, one of our kind of internal, sayings, don't harm the ducks. Like, it's kind of like Google's don't, do no evil or whatever. But yeah, I feel like if somebody can pull it off in South Beach, like that technology should be able to be used elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would make a ton of sense for ferries also. Like, take people back and forth across the bay here in Miami. That could be an alternate to this monorail that may or may not ever get built. So.
Yeah, no, I love that. Hopefully, okay, somebody go out and build this, please, for us all. But Chester, I know we're running out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Any shout outs, anything, follow Chester on Twitter. You can see his handles at Chest, and apply to the Builder Summit. When's the deadline to apply by?
I should know that. I don't know that. Probably says it on the website.
Well, check it out. And even beyond the Builder Summit, you guys have tons of companies are building and different roles. So even if you're not looking to maybe be a builder, a founder, check out some of the open roles. Atomic has beautiful offices. And yeah, thank you for being such an incredible partner in this community. You guys are doing such great stuff.
Likewise. Thank you both, Brian and Maria, for having me and for everything you do for the community. We're excited to build in Miami and, really excited for the future of this ecosystem. So thank you all.